Welcome back, everyone, for the final section of Chapter 12, Preparing Payroll Checks. Let's just do a quick review. In 12-1, we talked about how to compute total earnings and looked at regular earnings and overtime earnings. And overtime is any hours worked in excess of 8 hours in a day and 40 hours in a week, and you get time and a half. We add your regular earnings and your overtime earnings to get total earnings. And then in section 2, we talked about the major equation, which is total earnings minus deductions equals net pay. And we spent most of our time on deductions. The voluntary ones, which the employee decides, such as retirement plans and health insurance and other. And then there's the required by law deductions, also known as payroll taxes, and that's the federal income tax, where we use a tax table to determine the amount of the deduction. And then there was Social Security tax and Medicare tax, and we calculated those by taking total earnings times 0.062 for Social Security and 0.0145 for Medicare. And then in section 3, we talked about the payroll register and how we accumulate or summarize for all employees their earnings and deductions and net pay, and their earnings record for each individual employee so that we can report quarterly or annually to governmental agencies regarding the employee's earnings and deductions. So now we are going to talk about preparing payroll checks, and I alluded to this in 12.3 already, but we're just going to show you now. Don't forget that you have a couple handouts that you can use to take some notes on while we're working on this section if you would like. So let's get started with this first slide. It's just a definition, and I would go ahead and just write the definition on one of your other sheets, but it says that a voucher check has a detachable check stub, also known as a voucher, that contains detailed info about the cash payment. So I'll point these out when we get to them in the other section. So the first sheet that I have up here is for the payroll bank account, and I believe you have this handout as well. So the things that we want to show is first that you need to prepare the check stub. And the check stub is the part of this check that's going to be kept, whereas this is the check that's going to be sent to the payee. So prepare the check stub. And again, this is also known as a voucher. So put the payee on it, the date, the description, which payroll it is, and then the amount. And make sure that you know on the amount here that this is the net pay amount for the entire December 15th payroll. And again, we're looking at the payroll account when we're talking about this. So the general account is what we're writing the check out of, and we're going to put it into this First American Bank payroll account. Just moving the net pay over so we could segregate and separate and track separately in payroll, only payroll related transactions. So once we've done all of that and filled out a check, and you guys hopefully remember how to do that, so I'm not going to spend any time on that, then we would write all of the checks for the actual employees so that they get their pay for the time that they work. So on the employee's payroll check, these are individual checks. and we're writing the individual checks, I would circle this if it were me and say that this is his net pay that we're going to pay him out of the payroll account. And again, notice that this is the payroll account that we write individual people or employees checks out of. So we'll enter the earnings information from the payroll register and the time card here. Then we'll enter the year-to-date total earnings from the employee here. And then we'll enter the current deductions from the payroll register and record all over here. So these are our current ones from the payroll register. And then we'll add each of those year-to-date numbers from the previous period, add the current to get to where we are now. And we do that for all the earnings. Here's year-to-date earnings. Here is all the year-to-date deductions and the net pay. So we do it for all pieces. And then we prepare the payroll check for the amount of the net pay like I had talked about. Electronic funds transfer. Let me go back real quick. And this whole thing up here is the check stub, or also again known as the voucher, which the employee would keep this and then they would deposit this check. So then electronic funds transfers. Most employers now deposit checks directly into your account when you work for them, but that doesn't keep them from preparing a document to show what that direct deposit was. So this thing looks pretty much the same. It has all that same information up here on current and year-to-date earnings, current and year-to-date deductions, and current and year-to-date net pay. This is again a voucher that is maintained by the employee, and then they've written a check just like we did on the previous page, only it's not an actual check you can take to the bank in cash because they've already made the direct deposit directly into your checking account. So to summarize really this section, why do we have this separate checking account for payroll checks? I'd make sure I know this. A separate checking account is used to help protect and control the payroll payments, because then I know that if I have 5 employees, there should be 5 checks that are written out of it every pay period, and there are 5 checks that should clear that the employee cashed. And the end of that time, there should be nothing in the payroll account because I moved over that exact amount of what those 5 checks needed to be.